Welcome to War Bios. I'm your host, General Biography. Today, we're exploring one of the most pivotal battles in modern history, the Battle of Berlin. This epic conflict marked the culmination of World War II, as Allied forces closed in on the German capital, determined to bring an end to the Nazi regime. The story begins in the aftermath of World War I, when Germany, humiliated and economically devastated, became fertile ground for extremist ideologies. On January 30, 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, and by August 1934, he had consolidated power, declaring himself Führer. As Hitler's aggressive expansionism gained momentum, Europe teetered on the brink of war. The remilitarization of the Rhineland in March 1936, the annexation of Austria in March 1938, and the occupation of Czechoslovakia in March 1939 were all met with a policy of appeasement by Britain and France. However, when Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, the United Kingdom and France finally declared war. Over the next few years, Germany expanded its territorial control, invading Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The Battle of Britain, fought between the German Luftwaffe and the British Royal Air Force in the summer of 1940, was a decisive victory for the British, preventing the German invasion of the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, Hitler's attention turned to the Soviet Union, and on June 22, 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion that would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. As the war raged on, the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, absorbed the initial shock of the German assault and slowly began to push back. The turning point came in February 1943, when the Soviet Red Army defeated the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, marking a decisive shift in momentum on the Eastern Front. The Soviets continued their advance, and by the spring of 1945, Allied forces had closed in on Germany from both east and west. The city of Berlin, once a thriving metropolis, had been reduced to rubble by years of bombing and fighting. Its streets were lined with ruins, and its inhabitants lived in constant fear of air raids and artillery bombardments. As the Soviet army approached, the German military, led by Adolf Hitler, prepared for a desperate last stand. The Soviet Union's operational art played a crucial role in the Battle of Berlin. On April 16, 1945, the Soviet forces launched a massive assault on the German defenses with over 2 million troops, 6,000 tanks, and 40,000 artillery pieces. The Soviet army was divided into two main fronts: the First Belarusian Front, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, and the Second Belarusian Front, led by Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky. As the Soviet forces advanced, they encountered fierce resistance from the German army. The Germans had constructed a series of defensive lines, including the Seelow Heights, which proved to be a formidable obstacle for the Soviet troops. However, the Soviets were able to break through the German defenses, and by April 20, they had reached the outskirts of Berlin. The battle for Berlin was intense and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The Soviet forces used a combination of artillery, tanks, and infantry to blast their way through the city, while the Germans employed guerrilla tactics, including snipers, booby traps, and ambushes. The streets of Berlin were filled with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and screams as civilians were caught in the crossfire. One of the most significant events during the Battle of Berlin was the capture of the Reichstag building, which served as the seat of the German government. On April 30, 1945, a group of Soviet soldiers, led by Lieutenant Alexei Berest, planted the Soviet flag on the roof of the Reichstag, marking a symbolic victory for the Red Army. As the battle raged on, Adolf Hitler, realizing that the end was near, retreated to his underground bunker, where he would ultimately take his own life. On May 7, 1945, German forces in Berlin surrendered, and the city fell under Soviet control. The human costs were staggering, with over 300,000 Soviet soldiers killed or wounded, and tens of thousands of German civilians caught in the crossfire. The defeat of Nazi Germany marked the beginning of a new era in European history. The Allied powers, led by the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, began to divide Germany into occupation zones. The Soviet Union controlled the eastern sector, while the United States, Great Britain, and France controlled the western sectors. This division would eventually lead to the creation of two separate German states, East Germany, a socialist state aligned with the Soviet Union, and West Germany, a democratic state aligned with the Western powers. The Nuremberg trials, which took place from 1945 to 1949, were a series of proceedings held to prosecute top Nazi officials for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The trials were a significant milestone in the development of international law, as they established the principle that individuals could be held accountable for their actions, even if they were acting under orders from a higher authority. The trials resulted in the conviction of 12 high-ranking Nazi officials, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and Joachim von Ribbentrop. The Battle of Berlin also had a profound impact on the city itself. The once thriving metropolis was left in ruins, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The Soviet occupation authorities began to rebuild the city, but it would take decades for Berlin to recover from the devastation. Today, Berlin is a thriving city with a rich cultural and historical heritage. The city's history is still visible in its architecture, with many buildings and landmarks serving as reminders of the Battle of Berlin and the division of Germany. The legacy of the Battle of Berlin can also be seen in the modern-day relations between Russia and the West. The Soviet Union's role in the defeat of Nazi Germany earned it a significant amount of prestige and influence on the world stage. However, the division of Germany and the subsequent Cold War also created tensions between the Soviet Union and the Western powers that would last for decades. Today, Russia continues to play an important role in European politics, and its relations with the West remain complex and often contentious. In conclusion, the Battle of Berlin was a pivotal moment in modern history, marking the end of World War II in Europe and the beginning of a new era of international relations. The battle's legacy can still be seen today, from the division of Germany to the ongoing tensions between Russia and the West. The human costs of the Battle of Berlin were staggering, with over 300,000 Soviet soldiers killed or wounded, and tens of thousands of German civilians caught in the crossfire. The battle also marked the end of the Nazi regime's reign of terror, which had resulted in the deaths of millions of people, including 6 million Jews, during the Holocaust. We also hope that you will continue to explore the complexities and nuances of World War II and its ongoing impact on our world. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.